Good afternoon, everybody, and thank you so much for coming to our podcast this evening. We really appreciate so much our viewers, and I know we're starting to get a little traction. We're starting to see a few people come on every week, and it's really nice to see that. I'm Bob Persisepi, broker-owner of Blue Chip Real Estate in Southport, North Carolina, and with me today is our co-host, of course, Misty Sign, also from Blue Chip Real Estate, and we have a really special guest today that I can't wait to introduce, my good friend and colleague, John McBr. John is the North Carolina Association of Realtors chairman of the Political Action Committee. So, John, we are so glad to have you, and thank you for being here with us today.
Absolutely. It's quite the honor. And I'm kind of shocked, honestly, that you invited me, considering that, your trajectory of views and everything has increased so much. We're talking about politics, so I can only imagine how declining it's going to be for you. So, but
well, one thing we know,
yeah.
One thing we know about you and I, John, is that, as members of the Political Action Committee for the North Carolina Association of Realtors, we're not red, we're not blue, we are totally purple. We are purple. We call ourselves the Purple Solution, and I know both you and I are very, very proud of that. And Misty, I'm so glad that you're part of this because I know you and I talk about this stuff quite a bit, and it's it's not always political stuff. The way that we look at it, John and I serve together on the North Carolina Association of Realtors Political Action Committee. We look at it a little bit differently. We look at this as not political because we are not a partisan organization. We look at it as how we advocate for consumers, how we advocate for property owners, and what we do to stay in front of our industry and in front of our profession in terms of advocacy. But most importantly, the mystery that surrounds what realtors actually do when it comes to advocacy. And John, you know how deeply we go into that. And it's like, I think you used the example just the other day. I saw one of your posts is that there's certain things going on the surface that some people see, but the deeper picture is that realtors are very, very heavily engaged in making sure that the advocacy efforts for property ownership rights never stop. And you and I can speak to that like all day and all night. But I thank you so much for being on this podcast. And as I've said before to our viewers, hey, some of the stuff might be specific to real estate. Some of the stuff we talk about might be specific to apolitical issues. Some of it might be socioeconomic. Some of it might be area happenings in the Columbus and Brunswick County market. And John, you're from the Raleigh market. But whatever that topic might be, we are always interested in hearing what our viewers have to say. If you've got comments, please comment below. And Misty will definitely return your messages, or I will return your messages. And we would love to hear from you, good, bad, or anything that might be happening in between. So, Misty,
hey,
take it away. I know you've got a couple of questions.
You know I do. John, I know that both you and Bob, you're longtime advocates for property ownership rights, and both of you serve on the North Carolina Realtor Political Action Committee. And we want to thank you for your longtime advocacy efforts, of course. But my question is to you, can you share a few things that North Carolina realtors are currently addressing as legislative topics that you're working on right now? Is that something you could share with us?
Oh, absolutely. And again, Misty, thank you and Bob for allowing me to participate in this conversation with you. I think that's very important. And again, politics, especially in our world today, is very, very polarizing. But at the end of the day, when we look at what realtors do, of course, we help our clients buy and sell real estate. But, that is all very regulated. And I think it's important that realtors across the state and across the nation understand that while you may not like politics, your industry is involved in politics, and we need to make sure that we have a seat at the table. And that's why the NC Realtors PAC is so critical to ensuring not only the success for our industry, but also that we help protect property rights for our clients. And that's first and foremost one of our biggest priorities, is making sure that real estate stays relevant going forward. And just like your podcast title, Keeping It Real, I think that has a very broad brush scope to it. And so does what we do at RPAC. Granted, the polarization of Republicans and Democrats and everybody else that's involved in what we're seeing across the landscape. But at the end of the day, when you come home from work and you open your front door, you pull your garage open and you park, that home is so critical to your lifestyle and your quality of life and for you and your family, we want to make sure that we protect that right. And real estate is the greatest generational generation of wealth in this country. And it's very important that we make sure we have meaningful legislation and support that. Realtors are at the first and foremost of that. Again, thank you for having me and look forward to addressing that. Now, let's talk about what's kind of going on in North Carolina right now in terms
Yeah.
of legislation. We have the short session this year, so unfortunately we're not going to get a whole lot through. They've got to really work on it. And hopefully we'll get a budget passed this year. I'm very optimistic that we'll have a budget. At least what I'm hearing from both sides is that they seem to be coming to a compromise, and that's going to be good for the state as a whole. And so when we look at what kind of priorities NC Realtors is going to have, the biggest one right now is just focusing on that Senate Bill 205, which helps address some of the major issues we're having with housing right now, which includes housing affordability and housing inventory. Those are the two big priorities that we're trying to address. And that a lot of it has to do with how local and county governments regulate zoning and building permits. And so we're trying to work with them on ways that we can help stimulate production, right, inventory, while limiting what the local governments are able to control. Because we're getting into a world right now where a lot of the local governments are putting increased regulation on developers and builders, and it only increases the cost of housing. And, sometimes they're changing rules midstream as permits are being issued, or developers are trying to get, their whole master plan approved. So what we're trying to do is find compromises where we can streamline that, which again will lower the cost. And I think that House bill really addresses a lot of the problems we're having with that.
Yeah, you're right, John. That this particular bill will be quite impactful on increased construction costs.
Mhm.
And North Carolina definitely needs to look at that. We are in I hate to use the phrase housing crisis, but we're there.
Yeah. And Bob, correct me if I'm wrong. I'm thinking North Carolina, or I can't remember the exact number, but we did that study. Was it last year? It's like 700,000 units.
100. It's a scary number.
Wow.
Just in North Carolina.
46,000 housing units. That's the shortage of dwelling units. We call them dwelling units.
Yeah.
And that is a remarkable amount of money. And about a unit, let's remember that, most of that number is coming from migration from other areas, which we love. As we've discovered in the last couple of years, particularly, is that in North Carolina, we are wonderful. We do a wonderful, wonderful job of attracting folks to our marketplace across the state, but we really do a bad job at creating affordability for the people that we need the most. Our law enforcement people, our veterans, our firefighters, our EMTs, our school teachers, our nurses, our medical practitioners. We really have to make it affordable for these folks, and it's such a burden. I appreciate you sharing that.
I think one thing we've got to be careful of, and this is where NC Realtors PAC really comes into play, is trying to implement or bring barriers that cause friction for the free markets. And these over-regulation, over-policies that a lot of the local governments are working on and trying to work through really kind of slow down growth, which again drives up cost of housing when you don't have the inventory, and then the delays in having plans developed and permits issued. It just creates additional problems. So the biggest thing we can do right now is get more inventory to the market sooner rather than later.
Right.
That makes
I know
sense.
it sounds hard. It sounds hard to, build our way out of affordable housing, but it was really funny, John, because last week you and I were speaking at an event in
Was that Johnson County?
Johnson County, and there was the executive officer of a local association said to me, in our county, it's almost like it's like a giant HOA. That's how restrictive their county had gotten. And there's arguments on both sides of this, of course. And certainly realtors are very respectful to those, because we're all about the environment too. We kind of like environmental issues. We kind of like clean water, so but I thought that was actually kind of a funny statement. We're like a big giant HOA here, and I thought that was an interesting statement.
Yeah, and we are very fortunate. You mentioned earlier in North Carolina, we've got this great quality of life that we have here, which is drawing attention from a lot of companies that are relocating to the area. And that is wonderful news, right? It creates jobs, it creates income, and it really helps the state continue to evolve and develop into kind of a player across the nation, but it does bring challenges. The infrastructure you talked about, we do have to make sure that we have sound policies and practices in place, but at the same time, we don't need to be overburdensome with these policies and regulations. We just got to find that balance. And that's what NC Realtors is really working on, because we really want, our people to be able to live and work in the community together, versus right now we've got people commuting long distances between work and home life. And that puts a strain on the roads, on gas prices, their budgets. I mean, all these, and the quality of life. So all these things take into consideration. It would just be wonderful if we could end up working together and try to improve our housing supply. And that would help with the affordability piece.
Yeah, and I think that the Senate Bill 205 is going to be very, very impactful across the state, probably over the span of the next decade or so, because it's definitely a long game.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so, Misty, I'll kind of follow with you. I'm assuming you've never really been too heavily involved in NC Realtors PAC, right? So,
No, not as of yet. I haven't.
Right.
Just from hearing you guys, I mean, I'm blown away.
And that's the power, Bob, you and I were talking before, is having these conversations with realtors across the state, because a lot of them really don't understand the value that we have here in North Carolina as a realtor and what we do collectively as a PAC. And that's so important to what we do for our clients each and every day, and also protecting our industry. So I'm glad that you're on here, because you can kind of get a firsthand look at really some hard conversations that we're having across the state.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I agree.
It's interesting you said
now,
that.
Bob, I've been hearing this phrase downzoning being a hot topic recently all over North Carolina. Can you explain what that actually means to North Carolina property owners?
Yeah, once again, interesting question. So downzoning has been kind of speckled across the state. So what downzoning actually is, it's a municipal decision at many small municipalities, and in some cases in counties, where a municipality arbitrarily makes a decision to downzone a piece of real estate, meaning that they will take, let's say, for instance, a commercial piece of property, on a main street in a commercial environment somewhere in the state of North Carolina. And the municipality will make an arbitrary decision that they want to convert that to residential zoning, limiting the ability of the property owner to develop it for its original intent. And which sounds fine as long as there's an agreement between the property owner and the municipality and they can agree on it. But the downzoning, what's happened with it is it's been very one-sided, where a municipality will simply engage a downzoning on a specific parcel, and here's the key part, without the knowledge of the property owner. And it's happened painfully. It happened in the western part of the state after Hurricane Helene, where, we had a lot of townships that were, literally gone. And the municipality made a decision, well, let's change the zoning. And, Main Street's not here now, it's over here. Let's make this decision to downzone the property now. And the owners are finding out, wait a minute, I had this piece of commercial land or a piece of industrial land, and now it's reduced to a single family residential housing community zoning, and that affects my value of my property. The North Carolina Association of Realtors does not look at that as a favorable thing. And in many cases in the western part of the state, became a very heated topic immediately after some of the damage and devastation that we experienced during the hurricane. And thankfully, NC Realtors was able to get in front of our legislators and put restrictions on it. And I think there's a little bit of language in Senate Bill 205 that I think is addressing it, or maybe they removed it, but I'm not really sure where it fits in with that bill, but it's part of this, the protection of land ownership rights. Now, we had an example right here locally, and I live in a little town, Southport, North Carolina. We had a property owner here, like literally right down the street from my house, that had a commercial tract of land where he had his property downzoned to a residential footprint, and he had no knowledge it even happened. He had absolutely no knowledge. He was planning on building a little strip mall on it and found out the downzoning really put him in an ugly, ugly place. So that's kind of the definition of it. It's still a little heated across the state. There's little pocketed areas that are experiencing it more than others. But the position that the North Carolina Realtors Association is taking is kind of simple. let's make sure the property owners are aware of this, and let's make sure that they have a voice, that they have the opportunity to speak to it before, decision is rendered on it.
So
You
that's
can
my
always negotiate.
question. Do they not inform the homeowner that they are doing this? They just do it?
There have been multiple instances across the state where there was no informed consent to the property owner, which is what brought it to the legislation. And by the way, like exactly what John was talking about, these are some of the things that realtors across the state of North Carolina are trying to stay in front of. That's why I so appreciate what you do, John, because we literally have to have our ears to the ground in 100 counties all the time, and the issues that we have here on the coast may not necessarily be the same issues that realtor members and property owners in the mountains have, or in the Piedmont, or in some of the metro markets, and that's why realtors we kind of have to act as a body when it comes to that. And John, you brought something up that I'm just pure music to my ears. And to our realtor folks that are listening, to those of you that are realtor members and you're taking your income and your livelihood from the real estate profession, be aware, get engaged, be knowledgeable, speak intelligently to the topic. We can't bring the message to consumers until we bring it to our own membership. And that's why we just don't stop. Great question,
Yeah.
Misty. You always have the most
Hey,
provocative question.
I'm just full of questions. Now I got one for John because he got me thinking there for a minute. And, I always tell Bob, he needs a book and it needs to be called Book of Bob. I think I need to make one for John now, Book of John, because of all
already
this
exists.
knowledge
That is not
that
Matthew, Mark, Luke, John. It's one of the four gospels.
you guys are just so full of knowledge. But John, you mentioned, you kind of brought this up a few minutes ago, but can you talk to us a little bit about the immediate challenges of the housing affordability in North Carolina that the North Carolina Association of Realtors might be working on right now?
Yeah, so let's kind of go back a few years. If y'all remember, right before the start of COVID, was like 2019. I think that was the last full year of normal real estate numbers. We were tracking really good. Interest rates were doing well. The economy was chugging along. Inflation was low, and then COVID hit. And of course, the government really worked hard to try and figure out ways to stimulate, our government from slowing down and stopping, because we were on a very good trajectory. And part of those decisions that were being made is that we went down this path of artificially low mortgage interest rates. And again, that teeters with market conditions. We talked about the free market earlier. And what happened is it completely skewed people's ability to buy. And they were to buy very cheaply because the market grew so fast and so rapidly. If you remember, prices were going up, 20, 30, 40%. People were getting, 30% over list price. And, a lot of deals were cash. Homes were selling so fast that the market could not replenish itself and keep up. And we faced a lot of headwinds with that because prices rose so fast. We're now finding what happened. We're now that interest rates have increased, we're at an affordability crisis because rates have increased, housing costs have increased, and everything's kind of stopped, right? And so we're now at a market that, let's just call it a normal market cycle. We're about 2 or 3. I don't know what Brunswick County is doing today, but Raleigh's right at about a 2-month inventory level.
We're a little bit more than that
Okay.
here. I think our average days on market, we're hovering right around 109, 110 days on market. So I'm thinking we're kind of normalized. We've swung to a buyer's market,
Okay. Yeah. So we're starting to see that across the state. But a big part of what's happened is incomes have not kept up with the cost of cause, because your mortgage interest rates impact your ability to afford. Not only that, the price of housing. Now, we certainly don't want housing prices to crash. That's not going to be good for the economy and certainly not good for homeowners. So we're trying to find a balanced way to approach this. And a lot of that's going to be, we talked about earlier, let's increase inventory. But some other things that NC Realtors is constantly working on is making sure that we have support for the North Carolina Housing Finance Agency through funding, making sure that program exists to help first-time home buyers be able to afford their first home. And that's so important. We also support low-income housing tax credits. And then, we want to look at legislation that really allows more housing types and higher density. You talked about downzoning earlier, is how do we get more density into neighborhoods for like duplexes and triplexes and quads? This missing middle housing, how do we get that, which helps affordability inside the city, right? And that's going to help so many different avenues. And so those are
accessory dwelling units.
Yep. Raleigh passed an ADU ordinance, and now we can have ADUs in Raleigh. They did that last year. So we are looking at ways to help increase inventory, and that's going to be a big part of the affordability piece.
Okay.
Great
Well,
job.
that's
Thank you
great.
for that.
Now, Bob, at the federal level, there have been a lot of successes that the National Realtor Association of Realtors have accomplished in the last years that are quite important. But specifically, the rewriting of the capital gains on homes for American public. Can you give us a quick review of that?
Sure. John and I are more lean toward advocacy for the state, but we both are very engaged in what happened. We're aware of what's going on at the national level. I mean, I can think of a bunch of different successes. I'm very, very, very pro maintaining the mortgage interest deduction. I mean, I've been
Well, I
saying it,
would have
John.
never guessed that.
Yeah, John, you heard me say it more times. But
I know, right?
yeah, if you think about it, the mortgage interest deduction is very often the swing thought that a buyer who may be a renter is very often that mortgage interest deduction is the decision. It's the swing thought of having to make the decision of, do I rent a home or do I buy a home? And the mortgage interest deduction really swings that borrower over to the point where, hey, the tax advantages of the mortgage interest deduction are very, very powerful. Now that mortgage interest deduction has been under attack for over 20 years. And, our advocacy efforts at the federal level have kept that at bay. And it does look like, we're going to keep that at bay for another 2.5 years without any problems at all. But, it will very, very likely pop up again. And your realtor family will be continuing that advocacy effort until it's not challenged. That the capital gains, the mortgage interest deduction is a very, very powerful tool for home ownership opportunity. And John, at the state level, I'm always saying the same thing. You heard me say this more times than I can count. During the pandemic, I mean, we were Governor Cooper thought we should be a non-essential state, a non-essential business. And I always say the same thing. I mean, my friends, really seriously, can you think of anything that's more essential than housing? Okay. And really, it was the advocacy efforts of realtors across the state of North Carolina that got in front of that and said, we can't let that happen. Now you asked, Misty, more specifically federal things, without getting too nerdy.
Right.
So there's two bills right now. There's the Road to Housing Act our lobbyists at the national level are really pushing hard. House Bill 6644, and that's kind of a extension of what John was talking about with the Senate bill in the state of North Carolina, 205. That's kind of following those lines. It's the process of it's streamlining housing production. That's what it's all about, trying to streamline housing production, and most importantly, the modernization of a lot of outdated programs. HUD, Fannie, Freddie, all these outdated systems, and that modernization will streamline the processes a little bit. And NAR is really, there's a lot of meat in that bill. A lot, and it's probably going to get trimmed down and tuned up and tossed around a little bit. But House Bill 6644 is a big one, but not quite as big as the one. I love the way they named it, the More Homes on the Market Act. Well, gee, what's that, Bob? Well, we kind of want more homes on the market. It's not that complicated, but that bill. That's Senate Bill 3332. That bill is more specific to capital gain revisions. So, right now there's that $250,000 capital gains placement for single folks and $1,000 for married couples, which sounds like a gob of money, but it's not enough because prices have escalated and risen so fast, so high that that gain that many homeowners have, that purchases they made 15, 20, 30 years ago that are need to downsize or need to have a lateral move, they're going to get whacked in taxes so badly that they literally can't afford to sell these houses. And it does two things. If the capital gains exemption is raised, that will do two things. It'll open up a little bit of inventory, probably a lot of inventory, because sellers will be more inclined to bring their houses to the market if they know that they won't get beat up with tax. And the second thing it'll do is it'll give them an opportunity to make that lateral move or that downsizing move that will free up homes and inventory for the starter buyer or the move up buyer, who it'll kind of unkink the hose for inventory that we really need pretty badly. And it just kind of stimulates economic growth in so many different ways. So I think that kind of answered your question. Without getting too
Yeah.
nerdy, we have that House bill and that Senate bill. That's what's being worked on right now at the
Okay.
national level by our NAR lobbyists. John and I are not really engaged in that very much or at all, but we're aware of it and
Yeah.
how it works.
And Bob, if I may, I'd probably shoot
Yes,
myself
you may.
in this, especially you being down in Brunswick County. One of the things on a federal level too that we promote as realtors is making sure the flood insurance program stays intact,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
So
Oh gosh,
that's the biggie, and
that's
I think
a huge one.
Yeah.
That is a big one. I know, my wife is a loan officer. We own a mortgage company. We love Brunswick County, and most of Columbus County is under USDA Rural Development Zone. We love those loan programs for our first-time home buyers.
Absolutely.
Then we have to deal with the flood insurance issue. They freeze it. The funds are released, and they're closed, and they're open, and they're closed.
Yeah.
We've
I mean,
got
that's
to forget.
almost like the first thing a home buyer will ask you, is this in a flood zone?
Oh
I
my
mean,
gosh.
because it's a panic button.
Yeah. Oh, in Brunswick County, what is it like? 53% of our market's in a flood zone.
Really? Is it that much? I never
Oh, it's
imagined.
huge. Well,
Yeah.
we're kind of surrounded by water here.
Well,
You can't get anywhere in Brunswick County without a boat or without a bridge. I mean, like, it's that simple. 5 barrier islands. That's a lot of water. But yeah, I mean, I'm really glad you brought that up. And again, John, realtor advocacy really helps advance this. So that's a great conversation. We could go on and on and on. I mean,
Yeah.
and if for our viewers, if you want more information about any of these topics that we're talking about, you want to speak to John or I or Misty, we're glad to speak to you one-on-one, voice to voice. It's always helpful to do that. But in closing, let me just say this, John, I so appreciate, I know you're a busy, busy guy. You've been traveling a lot in the last couple of months. I mean, you and I are meeting in odd places, but it's so cool to be part of this. It's so cool to be engaged in these efforts for our realtor family, but most importantly, it's wonderful to be engaged for property owners across the state, that we do our very best in trying to make sure that we maintain property rights for you. And that's why I always say, you notice that I'm wearing my realtor hat, and John, I'm so glad that you've got your realtor hat on straight, because it's so impactful to what we do. So next time you see a realtor, shake their hand, give them a hug, let them know that you appreciate what they are doing. And we always say, we wear our realtor.Are pack pin, and we always say, Mr. and Mrs. Seller, Mr. and Mrs. Buyer, I've been advocating for you long before we ever met. I think that's pretty important. So, John, thank you so much. Misty, thank you for putting this podcast
Yeah.
together.
Yeah, I
And
want to
for
thank
our
you
viewers,
guys for all the work that you're doing. I mean, because I'm new to real estate, and I never realized how much the Political Action Committee actually did. That's just
most
not
people don't.
something.
Most people don't.
yeah,
Yeah, so
you're in
you
the
guys
majority.
have really brought a lot to light to me for what you actually do.
Yeah, and
Well,
Misty, if I and Misty and Bob, if I could just add one thing, just to kind of drive this point home. In North Carolina, every single real estate transaction that closes averages $115,000 economic benefit to that area.
That's right.
So that is per transaction, and that is a report that came out, and that's 2024 numbers, I believe. So it's only going to increase since then. But think about the impact $1,000 makes per closing, and now how important making sure that we as realtors advocate for protecting that for our property owners.
Yeah.
Great point, John. It's a great point. People don't think about all the ancillary services that happen,
Right.
when a home is purchased, and that might be over a length of time, but it's money that's flowing through the economy, and that's critical for North Carolinians.
It absolutely is.
Yeah. Well,
Absolutely.
John, we thank you so much for
Yes.
being on
Thank
our
you.
podcast, and
Been an honor. Really appreciate it.
yeah, and let's do this again, and maybe we'll talk about cooler stuff like Harleys and stuff. That'll be
We could
more
do
fun.
that, or fishing, and maybe the fishing
Yeah,
rodeo.
yeah. We could talk about
Yeah.
NASCAR, baseball, whatever. But
Yeah.
thank you so much, John, for putting this together with
Yes.
us. And Misty, thank
Thank
you
you.
for orchestrating everything, all the technical stuff in the background. And thank you to our viewers for taking the time to watch this podcast. And again, if you've got suggestions, we're always open to coming up with topics, regardless of where they are within the real estate confines, because I really don't know much outside of real estate. I mean, I can tune up a Harley, but other than that, we would love to share this podcast with your friends, with your family members. And thank you so much, and have a wonderful day keeping it real in coastal North Carolina. Thanks, John. Thanks, Misty.
Very
Thank
much.
you.
Appreciate it.